Something is deeply wrong with the official story of Australian history. Not slightly wrong, fundamentally wrong. And the evidence is not buried in classified archives or locked away in university vaults. It is sitting in open sunlight on sandstone cliff faces in New South Wales. It is carved into ancient rock shelters in the remote Kimberley. It is resting on the ocean floor off the Western Australian coast, and it is waiting in museum storage rooms where a small number of researchers are, quietly, asking questions that mainstream archaeology seems unwilling to answer publicly. Australia is supposed to have a clean historical narrative. Indigenous Australians arrived between 50,000 and 65,000 years ago, making them the oldest continuous culture on Earth. European explorers arrived in the 17th and 18th centuries, and nothing of significance happened in between. That is the official version. Simple, comfortable, and for most of the 20th century, resistant to any challenge. But 6 discoveries spread across this continent refuse to cooperate with that version of events. They do not bend, they do not soften, and the harder you look at the evidence surrounding each one, the more uncomfortable the questions become. Each one, on its own, might be explained away. Together, they form a pattern that demands a more honest response than Australian academia has so far been willing to give. Today, we examine all 6 honestly, without dismissing them as fringe nonsense, and without overclaiming them as proof of lost civilizations. Because the truth sits somewhere in the difficult middle ground, where evidence matters more than narrative. Welcome to this investigation into the 6 ancient Australian discoveries that do not fit into history. Discovery 1. The Gosford glyphs and the Egyptian connection in New South Wales. In a sandstone gorge near Gosford, on the New South Wales Central Coast, approximately 90 kilometres north of Sydney, sits one of the most controversial archaeological sites in Australia. Carved into 2 vertical sandstone walls within a shaded alcove that locals call the Egyptian Room, there are more than 300 individual hieroglyphic characters that, according to several researchers with backgrounds in ancient Egyptian linguistics, correspond to actual ancient Egyptian script forms. The site was reportedly discovered in 1975 by 2 bushwalkers who found the carvings already partially obscured by vegetation. When Ray Johnson and Mohammed Ibrahim, 2 independent researchers with serious Egyptological backgrounds, released their translation in 2012, the response from mainstream archaeology was swift and dismissive. Yet, the content of their translation was genuinely difficult to ignore. According to Johnson and Ibrahim, the glyphs describe an ancient Egyptian expedition to a land far to the south and east. The inscription references a Prince Nefertiru, identified as a son of Pharaoh Khufu, the ruler responsible for commissioning the Great Pyramid of Giza. The text describes the death of this prince during the expedition and the grief of survivors who carved this memorial into the sandstone walls of a foreign land, tens of thousands of kilometres from the Nile River. Mainstream archaeology pushes back hard on this interpretation. The official position from institutions, including the Australian Museum, is that the Gosford glyphs are a modern hoax, carved during the 20th century by someone with enough knowledge of ancient Egypt to be convincing at first glance. And there are legitimate grounds for skepticism. No independent radiometric dating has been successfully conducted on the sandstone. The weathering patterns experts describe as ambiguous. And the Gosford region has a documented history of individuals with deep interest in alternative history. But here is where honest analysis becomes complicated. Several professional Egyptologists, including academics unconnected to the alternative history community, have noted that the hieroglyphic forms in the Gosford carvings are consistent with Old Kingdom Egyptian writing from approximately 4,500 years ago. The specific script variants represented are obscure, not the forms that appear in popular books or museum exhibitions. A modern hoaxer capable of accurately replicating these particular Old Kingdom variants would need specialist knowledge held by perhaps a few hundred people on Earth. That does not make the hoax theory impossible, but it makes it considerably more complex than the mainstream dismissal suggests. The Gosford glyphs have not been proven ancient. They have also not been convincingly debunked. That unresolved uncertainty in a site sitting openly in scrubland outside a regional New South Wales city is itself remarkable. Discovery 2. The Gympie Pyramid and the structure that should not exist in Queensland. Approximately 160 kilometres north of Brisbane, on the outskirts of the Queensland town of Gympie, There stood for much of the 20th century a large terraced hill formation that generated more controversy per square metre than almost any other site in Australian archaeological history. The Gympie pyramid was a stepped terraced structure, rising approximately 50 metres above the surrounding landscape, constructed from hand-placed basalt stones, arranged in distinct horizontal layers with visible geometric regularity. Local residents had known about it for generations, but it entered wider public discussion in the 1970s when journalist Rex Gilroy documented it and proposed that the terracing was too precise and too structurally consistent to be explained as natural geology or ordinary 19th century agriculture. The mainstream explanation settled on a combination of natural erosion and agricultural terracing by European settlers. And it is true that the Gympie region was intensively farmed in the colonial period. Terracing for vineyard cultivation was documented in the area, brought by European migrants familiar with terraced agriculture from southern Europe. The problem is that certain stone arrangements at the base of the structure did not align with European agricultural practices of that period. Researchers who examined the site before its partial destruction during infrastructure construction noted placement and bonding techniques inconsistent with 19th century Queensland farming. In specific sections, the stone arrangement showed characteristics more consistent with deliberate ceremonial construction than vineyard management requirements. Further complicating the official picture, a carved stone figure recovered near the site in the 1960s by local landowner Dal Walker has been described by several academics as displaying characteristics consistent with Phoenician or Hindu sculptural traditions. The figure has remained in private collection and therefore resisted proper independent analysis. It is a dimension of the Gympie story that mainstream archaeology has consistently declined to engage with directly. The partial destruction of the Gympie pyramid site during infrastructure development means a definitive answer is now impossible. The evidence that might have settled the question no longer exists, and that represents an irreversible failure of Australian heritage preservation policy, regardless of what the historical truth might have been. It is worth stating plainly that the decision to proceed with construction without first conducting a thorough, independent archaeological assessment was made at a time when the controversy surrounding the site was well known. That decision removed from the historical record something that could not be recovered. Whether the structure was ancient or colonial, the loss of the evidence itself is a failure that no amount of official dismissal can paper over. Discovery 3. The Gwion Gwion figures and the artists nobody can identify in the Kimberley. In the remote Kimberley region of Western Australia, across thousands of kilometres of ancient rock shelters and cliff faces, there exists one of the most extensive galleries of prehistoric rock art anywhere on Earth. The majority belongs to the Wandjina tradition, created by the ancestors of the Ngarinyaan, Wunumbal, and Worora peoples, representing some of the most significant cultural heritage in Australia. But within this broader gallery, there is a distinct and separate stylistic tradition known to researchers as the Gwion Gwion figures, and to the local Ngarinyaan people as Gwion Gwion or Kiro Kiro. These figures are unlike anything else in Australian rock art. They depict extraordinarily detailed human forms adorned with elaborate feathered headdresses, tasseled ceremonial garments with multiple layers of decoration, and physical proportions that differ dramatically from the broader traditions of Australian Indigenous art. The dating of these figures has been a source of sustained academic controversy. A 1997 University of Melbourne study attempted to establish age by dating wasp nests overlying the pigment layers, producing estimates of between 17,000 and 19,000 years before the present. If accurate, this would place the Gwion Gwion figures among the oldest examples of sophisticated figurative art anywhere on Earth. Subsequent research has challenged these specific dates, and current consensus acknowledges a wide and uncertain time frame that remains unresolved. What makes these figures genuinely anomalous is not primarily their age, but the character of their artistic tradition. The style has no identifiable developmental precursor in the Australian archaeological record. It appears essentially fully formed, with no visible sequence of artistic experimentation leading up to it. The detail of the garments, the complexity of the headdresses, and the dynamic naturalistic postures represent a level of sophistication that seems to arrive in the Kimberley without any traceable antecedent. Researchers, including paleoanthropologist Stephen Oppenheimer, have noted stylistic affinities between the Gwion Gwion figures and rock art traditions found in parts of sub-Saharan Africa and island Southeast Asia from broadly comparable time periods. This does not prove population movement or cultural transmission across ancient seas, but it raises serious questions about the movement of people and ideas across the ancient world that Australian archaeology has only recently begun to engage with, honestly. Any investigation of these questions must be conducted in genuine partnership with the Ngunnawal custodians, whose oral traditions about the Gwion Gwion figures contain knowledge that no outside researcher has yet fully integrated. Discovery 4. The ancient coins of the Northern Territory and the visitors nobody recorded. In 1944, during wartime military operations in Australia's Northern Territory, a soldier named Maury Eisenberg discovered 5 small copper coins near a river mouth on the Wessel Islands, a remote archipelago off the Arnhem Land coast. The coins were set aside for decades, and it was not until 1979 that numismatist Ian McIntosh examined them properly. What McIntosh identified was startling. The coins were positively identified as originating from the Kilwa Sultanate, a powerful medieval Islamic trading state on the East African coast in what is now Tanzania. The Kilwa Sultanate operated at its peak between the 9th and 13th centuries, and coins from this period are among the rarest numismatic objects in the world. Fewer than a dozen have ever been recovered outside East Africa. 5 of them were found on a remote Australian island. How these coins reached the Wessel Islands has never been satisfactorily explained. Macassan traders from the Indonesian archipelago made sustained and well-documented contact with northern Australian coastal communities for centuries before European arrival, primarily to harvest trepang for the Chinese market. This contact is archaeologically supported and firmly accepted within mainstream history, but the Kilwa Sultanate is not Macassan. The accepted Macassan trade network does not extend to East Africa in any configuration that would naturally transport coins from the Tanzanian coast to an Australian island. The more unsettling possibility, which mainstream scholarship treats with caution, bordering on avoidance, is that these coins arrived through the wider medieval Indian Ocean trading network, which demonstrably connected East Africa, Arabia, the Indian subcontinent, and Southeast Asia during precisely the centuries when Kilwa coins were being struck. Whether any branch of this network extended to the northern Australian coastline is an open and important historical question. It is also worth noting the broader context. Chinese Admiral Zheng, his famous treasure fleet voyages of the early 15th century reached the East African coast, trading with Swahili port cities, including Kilwa itself. Whether those same networks, or networks branching from them, extended southward and eastward to reach the Australian coastline is a question that the Wessel Island coins make considerably harder to dismiss. 5 coins are not proof of ancient civilization contact, but 5 coins of this rarity, this geographical specificity, and this origin, recovered from a remote Australian archipelago, deserve far more sustained scientific investigation than they have ever received. Discovery 5. The Murujuga petroglyphs and the oldest astronomical records on Earth. On the Burrup Peninsula, in the Pilbara region of Western Australia, there exists the largest concentration of ancient rock engravings found anywhere in the world. The Murujuga petroglyphs, also known as the Gympie Rock Art Complex, contain an estimated 1 million individual engravings across a series of rocky ridges along the Indian Ocean shoreline. The traditional custodians of this landscape are the Ngada Ngali peoples, and the site holds profound cultural and spiritual significance within their living tradition. The images engraved into the dark red ironstone rocks at Murujuga encompass animals, human figures, geometric patterns, and forms that researchers are still working to fully categorize. Among the engraved animals are depictions of species now extinct on the Australian mainland, including the thylacine, which disappeared from the mainland approximately 3,000 years ago, and possibly the Tasmanian devil, which vanished even earlier. These depictions of extinct fauna provide a minimum age for certain engravings that places them among the oldest verified rock art in the country. But it is the possible astronomical content of the Murujuga engravings that generates the most significant scientific debate. Astronomer Dwayne Hammaker at the University of Melbourne, specialising in Indigenous Australian astronomical knowledge, has documented rigorous evidence that Aboriginal Australians maintained extraordinarily sophisticated astronomical traditions, including long-term stellar records spanning thousands of years of continuous observation. Murujuga potentially sits at the center of this tradition. Specific configurations at Murujuga appear to correspond to astronomical alignments. Some researchers propose that certain arrangements encode records of stellar positions as they appeared thousands of years ago, accounting for the precessional shift of the Earth's axis across millennia. If this interpretation is supported by further research, the Murujuga petroglyphs would constitute the oldest verifiable astronomical records in human history, predating Babylonian and Egyptian astronomy by thousands of years. The challenges of verification are genuine and must be acknowledged. Reading deliberate astronomical intent into ancient engravings requires interpretive frameworks difficult to establish with peer-reviewed certainty, but the extraordinary density of the Murujuga site, combined with the documented sophistication of Aboriginal astronomical knowledge, makes outright dismissal equally unjustifiable. Murujuga is a site of global scientific importance that is being actively threatened by industrial expansion in the Pilbara. That threat should concern anyone who values the preservation of human heritage. Discovery 6. The Wandjina figures and the tradition that challenges everything we think we know. Return to the Kimberley, to the same ancient rock shelters that preserve the Gwion Gwion figures. Among the most sacred elements of Kimberley rock art are the Wandjina figures, created across generations by the ancestors of the Ngarinyin, Wunambal, and Wurora peoples. The Wandjina are powerful ancestral beings associated with rain, clouds, lightning, and the creative forces of the dreaming. They are living spiritual presences within a tradition that continues today. The Wandjina figures are visually distinctive in ways that have attracted attention far beyond Australia. They are large, frontally oriented human forms with enormous circular heads surrounded by radiating halos of white pigment, wide and deeply expressive oval eyes, bodies decorated with complex symbolic patterns, and in most depictions, an absence of a visible mouth. They are among the most visually striking examples of rock art produced anywhere on Earth. The sensationalist interpretation, amplified across internet platforms for 2 decades, holds that the visual profile of the Wandjina figures, the circular halo, the large eyes, the bodysuit-like forms, represents extraterrestrial visitors wearing pressurized helmets. This interpretation has reached audiences of millions through documentary films and best-selling books. It is necessary to be direct. The extraterrestrial interpretation of the Wandjina figures is not supported by any credible evidence, and it represents a damaging misappropriation of living Indigenous Australian cultural heritage. The Wandjina are sacred beings within a continuous and unbroken spiritual tradition. The Ngarinyin, Wunambal, and Wurora communities are their custodians. The meaning of the Wandjina figures is not mysterious or ambiguous to the communities who have maintained this tradition for thousands of years. Presenting these figures as evidence of alien contact is not bold inquiry. It is cultural disrespect, dressed up as curiosity. The legitimate and genuinely interesting questions about the Wandjina tradition concern the extraordinary depth of Indigenous Australian spiritual and ecological knowledge, and what that knowledge reveals about the deep history of human consciousness and cultural development. The late Ngarinyin elder David Mwaljalai, who worked alongside researchers for decades, spoke about the Wandjina as representing a form of spiritual understanding he believed connected to similar knowledge held by ancient peoples across the world. That observation, from a custodian of the tradition itself, is worth more than any ancient astronaut theory. The Wandjina figures are not evidence of alien contact. They are evidence of one of the oldest, deepest, and most sophisticated spiritual traditions ever sustained by human beings. They deserve to be understood on those terms. 6 discoveries. 6 sites where the official version of Australian history develops fractures that careful scientific skepticism alone cannot close. The Gosford glyphs, with their hieroglyphic inscriptions that professional Egyptologists struggle to dismiss as simply as institutions prefer. The Gympie pyramid, partially destroyed before the evidence could be secured. The Gwion Gwion figures, appearing in the Kimberley record fully formed, without traceable antecedent. The Kilwa coins on a remote island with no satisfying explanation. The Murujuga petroglyphs encoding astronomical observations of global significance while under active industrial threat. and the Wandjina figures carrying a living spiritual tradition whose depth challenges assumptions about where sophisticated human knowledge began. None of these discoveries proves that ancient Egyptians navigated to New South Wales, or that medieval East African traders contacted Arnhem Land communities, or that extraterrestrial beings visited the Kimberley. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that evidence does not exist for any of those conclusions. But extraordinary evidence does exist that Australian history is older, more complex, and more connected to the broader ancient world than the textbook account acknowledges. The honest, scientifically responsible position is to follow that evidence wherever it leads, even when it disrupts comfortable institutional narratives and requires rethinking what we understood about this continent and the people who have called it home for longer than any civilization in recorded history. Australia holds answers to profound questions about early human migration, astronomical knowledge, artistic tradition, maritime capability, and the deep interconnection of ancient cultures that the world has barely begun to ask properly. The sites that hold those answers deserve genuine protection, serious scientific investment, and the respectful partnership of the Indigenous Australian communities who have been custodians of this knowledge across timescales that dwarf everything we call recorded history. The cost of getting this wrong is not an academic footnote. It is the permanent loss of knowledge that belongs to all of humanity. Australia already lost parts of Gympie. Murujuga faces this threat right now. The window will not stay open.